Bonjour, history students. Today we'll be talking about absolutism in France, focusing especially on Louis XIV, whom you see pictured right there. By the end of this video, what you should be able to do is trace or lay out, explain the religious struggles in France between Catholics and Protestants. You should also be able to explain how Louis XIV, again the primary subject of our absolutism discussion in France, how he consolidated power within his kingdom, and describe his contributions to French culture. You should also be able to define or identify these people in terms Huguenots, Edict of Nantes, Cardinal Richelieu, and Versailles. So, before Louis XIV comes along, France is marked by a series of religious struggles. You have the Catholics, and you also have French Calvinist Protestants known as Huguenots that were constantly at odds for power and favor within France. King Henry IV was a very influential king. He ruled for about 21 years. He was a Huguenot originally when he came to the throne, but not long after becoming king, he actually converted to Catholicism because France, despite having a Protestant Huguenot presence, is primarily Catholic. Catholics made up a vast majority of the population. So King Henry decided it would actually just be easier to rule as a Catholic. But he did issue in 1598 a decree called the Edict of Nantes, which gave Huguenots freedom of religion within France. And he thought this would smooth things over and make things easier for him, and maybe it did for a time. But in 1610, he got assassinated, which is the picture there at the bottom. If you look closely, you can see a guy brandishing a knife and stabbing King Henry as his carriage was stuck in traffic, and he was actually stabbed by a Catholic fanatic who thought, I guess, that he wasn't Catholic enough. So, anyway, after Henry IV is whacked, he is succeeded by Louis XIII. Louis XIII appointed as his most influential minister in government a cardinal named Cardinal Richelieu, who strengthened the government and did a lot to weaken the Huguenots. Henry IV, for example, had given Huguenots the right to build walled fortifications around their cities to protect them from would-be threats from the Catholic community. And Cardinal Richelieu, in many cases, authorized that those walled fortifications be torn down and Huguenot settlements and towns be harassed. There was always a lot of conflict in absolutist countries between the king and the nobility, because the nobility wanted more power, and the king obviously wanted to have absolute power. So what Cardinal Richelieu did in France to keep the nobility happy is he gave them really cushy government positions. And that served a couple of purposes. One, it kept them happy and well paid, the nobles. And it also made them answerable to the royal court, because he could tell the nobles if they started to speak out against the king, like, well, you got this cushy job, but we could just take it away as easy as we gave it to you. So that sort of helped the monarchy consolidate power within France. So that brings us to Louis XIV. He became king at the age of 5 in 1643, and that's his picture there as a boy. When he was little, there were still a lot of uprisings in France. There was a lot of strife between Catholics and Protestants. The poor were upset. So a lot of people rebelled against the monarchy for their own reasons. And that series of uprisings is known as the Fronde. Now, imagine you are a 5-year-old, so he's kindergarten age, right? He's a 5-year-old king sitting in his castle, and he sees these people outside with torches and pitchforks who want to kill him. It scared the living bejesus out of the young king. And at some point, he was actually forced from his castle and forced into hiding. But once these uprisings were quelled, this stuck with Louis XIV, and it made him determined to be a powerful, absolute ruler to make sure that no one ever threatened his authority again. So, Louis XIV is really one of the prime examples of being an absolute ruler in Europe. I mentioned in the introductory video to this unit, he has a quote attributed to him, "L'État c'est moi," which means "I am the state." So he is the primary, the only really source of authority within France. He did have some ministers that were his primary advisors. Richelieu was dead, but his successors. But over time, Louis XIV kind of phased that out and took all the power for himself. There was a assembly of common people in France that were below the monarchy. They were known as the Estates General. Society in France was divided into three classes or estates. The first estate was the clergy, because they're closest to God. The second estate was the nobility. And the third estate was like the other 98%. That's pretty much everybody else. And we're going to talk more about that system when we talk about the French Revolution a couple of units hence. But in 72 years as king, Louis XIV never gathered the Estates General one time. So he was not listening to advice. He wasn't trying to have it and kept all the power for himself. He built a very powerful army, and while Louis XIV was in power, France had one of the dominant military forces in Europe. He also, as a symbol of his power, built this huge, sprawling palace at Versailles, which is located just outside of Paris. There's a picture of it right there. It is humongous. It cost a ton of money, and it cost a lot of money to maintain and keep up once it was actually built. To fund all of these things that made France both militarily powerful and appear powerful by having these extravagant palaces and stuff like that, he collected taxes from the people and brought in a ton of money, but they still were not doing so well. They ran in the red for much of Louis XIV's reign because of this extravagance, these lavish court ceremonies and these big palaces and purchasing art and all that kind of stuff. And the military was well paid and well fed and all of that, but it was a huge army and they had to be paid, and it was expensive. So despite all of this extravagance, financially, France really not all that solvent at this time. But Louis XIV's court did foster a flowering of the arts. For example, plays and novels that were based on Greek and Roman myths, those classical inspirations to which a lot of European societies aspired at that time. This is where ballet became popular. It existed before Louis XIV, but a lot of Louis XIV's courtiers really enjoyed ballet and had performances at Versailles of experts in the field, expert ballerinas as it were. So that's really where it picked up popularity and became known the world over. He also bankrolled what he called academies, which were schools, groups of philosophers and scientists and experts in different fields that did research and spread knowledge and interest in the arts and sciences all over France. So Louis XIV, kind of a mixed bag in France, very powerful, kind of built France up, kept them protected from outside invasion. At the same time, not a lot of money. You will talk about with the French Revolution, he sort of leaves them weakened down the road, and it's not too long after Louis XIV died that the French Revolution happens and the monarchy is gone altogether. But some good things happen there with the arts becoming more popular as well. So that'll do it for France and absolutism. Let your teacher know if you have any questions. Cheers.